This is Earthworm's Slumber Party,
where we explore big ideas playfully.
My name is Opulence, and I'm observing Ramadan.
My name is Nisha, and I have a joke for you, Opulence. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
What did the ocean say to the beach?
It waved hello.
You got it. It was, according to this dad jokes corny website, it's nothing. It just waved.
Well, that is a dad joke. I'm definitely a tried and true dad joke for
An
sure.
earthy dad joke. At least it's like very nice and wholesome.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
So, as we do, I'd love to hear, what are you composting?
What a beautiful question. As I shared in the intro, I'm observing Ramadan. And so I think in some ways I'm composting mindless eating specifically, but mindless action. And I know that doing things without thinking, it's honestly, I think like snacking is a form of self-regulation. So I'm not a hater on it. But there is something about intentionally not acting on an impulse that brings awareness to the impulse. And by not acting on it, even once, right? Because this is just a temporary state of being for me. And I will go back to eating and probably snacking again. But I do feel how the singular act of not acting on an impulse erodes something. It shifts the relationship between you and the impulsive behavior. So I think I'm composting impulsive behavior this week.
Oh, okay. Well, That's super interesting to me because I feel like I'm composting something similar, but from a different lens, which is pretty exciting. Which is, I feel like I'm composting like my Sagittarius moon. So
tell me more.
Yes. So how I feel like my Sagittarius moon, so for those of you who are not into astrology, Sagittarius is like the explorer, wants to like, it could be like traveling, it could be inner exploration, outer exploration. And for me, it comes in the form of like having lots of ideas. And since I have my own business and I love what I do, it comes in the form of being like, oh, I want to do this. And then I'll focus on this. And it just feels like really, I don't know, it just feels really overwhelming and I get really ungrounded. But the interesting thing is, you know, this is Earthworm Slumber Party and we are earth signs. I am a Virgo sun. So I feel like there's a big conflict between the two. And, but what I'm realizing as the moon is a reflection of the sun, I'm starting to see the ways that my Sagittarius moon are just like different parts of the light of my core self. And when I see that and like I compost I guess the emotional drive, and in a way I'm kind of also reading that as impulse of my Sagittarius moon, like you have to do this. I'm composting it in a way where I'm integrating my Virgo sun too, to be like, remember to be, this is the like, you know, the emotional part, the part that gets you excited, the part that gets you going, but how are you going to ground this? So that's what I'm composting.
You know, listening to you, integration was the word that was coming up. And if I can, I'm curious, what is your rising? Oh, you're a Leo rising.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yes. I do think that, you know, one of my favorite astrologers, Jessica Lanyadoo, talks a lot about our big three placements in relation to age. And I really think of our moon as representing what we embody as children. And then obviously we always have our inner child. And I think a Sagittarius moon is like very beautiful in that way, to continue to have dreams and to be pulled towards play. But I also actually think that, you know, as Jessica Lanyadoo asserts that as you age, you be like, especially after your 30s and into your 40s, is when you begin to embody truly your rising sign. So I wonder how that integration into the Virgo sun and even growing into that Leo fire, how that's working with all of it. Fascinating.
Yeah, there's so much. I feel like we should probably do a whole episode on astrology because I know we both really like it. And I've lately really been thinking about it. And my Mars is in Leo too. So there's like this part of me that just wants to like go and do. And I think like between both of like my Sag moon and Mars Leo and Leo rising, it's like there's a lot of like explore, show. And then the grounding gets lost in it. That's what I'm kind of feeling. But I love thinking about that, like the moon representing your inner child, because I think, well, and we're actually going to talk about this today. So maybe I'll just save this for the story.
Okay, I can't wait to hear.
Yeah.
I definitely think it would be powerful to do an episode on astrology. You know, there's a joke that like, if you're gay, you have to know astrology because it's such a big thing in the queer community. And a lot of people have talked and ideated on like why that is and how people find a sense of grounding and direction from astrology that they might lose when they have to leave communities of faith due to transitioning or due to sexual orientation. I think something that I think about a lot with astrology, and this is just the last note before we, get into our juicy episode topic,
So juicy.
is I think it's so interesting how I've seen a trend of, especially people who are maybe a generation younger than me in the US, really uplifting sidereal astrology as the quote unquote better or more liberated astrology. I've heard tropical astrology referred to as the colonizer's astrology. And what I think is ironic about it is because my understanding of sidereal astrology is that it's very similar to Vedic astrology. And I think that I've also seen my Indian friends be like, Vedic astrology, sidereal astrology, oppressive, tropical astrology is the liberated astrology. And when I say my Indian friends, I literally mean my friends in India.
Interesting.
And I think it is just so interesting because it just shows how people from different sides of the world can have the same values and can also be witnessing the astrology of their culture as an oppressive tool.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just wanted to create space to name that astrology is both liberating and is like the cultural language of this oppressed community I'm a part of. And it can also be a tool of weaponization. And I guess my final little thought on this whole sidebar about astrology is that one of my favorite astrologers, Astro for the People, Giselle, truly an astrologist for the people. Giselle has learned astrology from Black and Brown elders, studies tropical astrology, and while most people will say tropical astrology is Grecian astrology, Giselle roots me in the truth that in Greece, there is a lot of trees and mountains. It's not a good place for stargazing. What we think of as Hellenistic or Grecian astrology is actually Egyptian astrology. And I think that points to a deeper truth that while we may attribute something as the inventor, a culture, or a person, we have to remember that in the past, people were not fixed. There was a lot of cultural exchange and spread of ideas. So I just wanted to share those thoughts on astrology.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting because, I've always seen it as like the Hellenistic astrology. And I also think it's interesting that there were these two like also big empires, right? The Greek Empire as well as the Egyptian Empire at their own times. And just thinking about like wondering about that history. But all right, we'll save this for another episode. But kind of continuing off of this, I did want to ask you, what is your experience? Because I'm gonna share more about this, but I'm curious for what your experience is with people or systems telling you who you are or who you need to be.
I mean, unfortunately, a lot of experience with it. I think like maybe the most boring struggle of my life, but the most consistent is to be an intersex world, born into this weird dystopian world where everyone's like, there's only two sexes. And I think that like, when I was a kid, and I both got feedback from my peers and my family that I had a lot of like quote unquote masculine traits. And then like my facial hair started growing in when I was like 8. It created a lot of tension because it's not like, to be intersex is a little different than it is to be a trans person, because I didn't take hormones or even choose this identity. This is literally just how my body is. And so I think that like both when I was a teenager and no one had any reference point or any like my body just going through puberty and developing and growing was met with such intense anxiety from my mom, rejection from the world around me, to have all those experiences and then to accept my body, but to live in constant having to manage things like not being able to access a gym because there is, it's better now. Now there's more family restrooms or locker rooms or like gender neutral spaces. But even doing things like going to the spa with my friends carries a weight of anxiety with it that's honestly boring to me. Like my gender is like probably the least, it's like the least interesting thing about me, I think, but it is something that rules my life all the way to this current moment where a few weeks ago, our president is on stage saying there's only 2 sexes. And I know that's like a worldview that a lot of people hold, not even maliciously. I'm sure a lot of trans allies, and I'm sure a lot of trans people don't really even know about intersex people or how common it is to be intersex. So that's probably my most resonant life experience of people trying to like tell me something about myself where I'm like, I hear you. Like, I hear that I'm assigned female at birth, and I hear that you're saying I have polycystic ovarian syndrome, but I don't think I have cysts on my ovaries. I don't think I like am a woman. I know myself to be, not because I like, to more than just intellectually, but in my body is a queer body, right? So that's how I relate to what you're bringing up.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I'm actually going to take a breath because there's just so much like happening. Yeah. I always like just really lean in when you talk about your experience being intersex, because I think it's completely decentered, if not even like off the page, you know what I mean? And like you said, I really like how you said, like, it's something that's actually the most boring thing about me, and yet it is something that is so centered. And I think that, I don't know if that's a dichotomy or a juxtaposition or whatever it is. It kind of goes to show how something can rule your life every day when it just doesn't fucking have to. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for leaning in, Nisha. I think that like, in truth, I look around me and I see so many people who exist outside the gender binary. And I think, even in high school, I met and I connected with some other young people who had their own secrets of their body being gender diverse. And there was like a lot of people assigned at birth as male who were growing breasts and like had corrective surgeries. Sometimes they weren't even informed of why they were receiving the surgery or what was really going on with their body. And that's a theme in intersex bodies, is medical intervention. And it's actually super normalized, and it's just like taught as the appropriate way to respond. I think it brings out that, yes, we live in a false binary. In truth, people's bodies look so many different ways, and intersex people are really common. Well, I think an intersex person who meets the medical definition is probably 1 to 2%, like they say as common as redheads. But people whose bodies or hormones vary from the norm are as common as 1 in 250 live births. And I think that's actually quite common. And I think when I started learning about this, I realized that like we think of our sex, right? Not gender, but sex as a concrete thing, but it's actually a set of things. So it's reproductive organs, chromosomes, hormones, secondary like body characteristics. But all this to say, I think a lot of people in the magic that is gender, you know, which is something harder to pin down. It's something innate in who we are. I think a lot of people don't fit a rigid idea of man or woman. And I think most of the time it's not a big deal and we let it slide, you know? But I think that when you ask me this question of like, has someone forced you to be something you aren't? I think that a lot of us bump up against that with gender, whether it's a stranger making a joke to us, like a sexist joke, like, oh, you're a woman, you should be making me a sandwich right now, right? We feel our repulsion to that because most of us don't live to make sandwiches, you know?
I mean, some sandwiches I do live to make, but yes, I agree for the most part what you're saying. Yeah, no, for sure. I appreciate, this is so like helpful. And I think one thing that you really like, it's like literally, it's like a physical body experience. And I think that is such a great entry point kind of for what I'm going to talk about, in that I think sometimes when we're told who to be, we think it's just in our minds, but it actually really impacts our bodies. And for you, it is like, you know, something like like you said, all these different variables and these components, I forget exactly the word you use, that determines like what people like our society says sex is or should be. But then there's all these different variables that actually present themselves. But I also think about how we kind of mindfuck ourselves by thinking everything's just in our head. And so this is coming to my story. So the story starts like in my mid-20s. I was dating to marry, right? I mean, I'm a cishet woman, South Asian. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get married. And I was, probably like maybe 24 or something. And I had a boyfriend, like my first love, who we broke up, and it was kind of an intense breakup. And I was like, okay, I'm going to get a guy who's like different. Like, cause I always like didn't want two mainstream guys, but yeah, I mean, I won't get too into that side cause that could be another episode, but, well, that's also going to be my memoir. So stay tuned. But I think for me, when I went on this one date with this guy, I'll just call him M. So M in his profile, and this was on indiandating.com, said that he really wants someone who has a passion. And it was a really kind of a trigger point, and I'm going to say it like this on my body, like I feel it in like my chest, because I feel like for me, it's like a constriction. One thing that I struggled with ever since I was like a preteen was like, what am I going to be when I grow up? And I never like knew, and I would constantly like, I would go to the library and I would look at career books and I would look at like different subject areas. Like, what am I going to major in? I felt like the only decision that mattered in my life besides who I was going to marry. So, you know, very much, and I grew up in the 90s, so I'm like, I lived in a rom-com world, y'all. So like, just know that that's how I pictured my life to be. Plus I was going to have a job I was very passionate about, but I never knew what that really was. And I don't even know when people would ask what your hobbies are. I would just like, even when I was younger, I'd be like, oh, well, you know, I like to read and, you know, hang out with my friends. It just felt so fucking boring, honestly, and basic. And when M was like, I really want someone who's passionate, at that time, like, I kind of feel like I forced myself to like have a passion so that he would like me, so I would be acceptable. And I remember we met at a Caribou Coffee, and I remember even in his profile, he's like, I don't even care if it's like crochet knitting. As long as you're passionate about it, that's what I want. Because he was like kind of a creative person, did stuff with like film and stuff like that. And like basically we met, the meeting was fine. I was really interested in seeing him a second time, not necessarily because I thought like he was the one or anything, but I was at a point where I was really good. I mean, this is also like what lasted throughout my marriage. I'm a master at convincing myself that this is going to be okay. And like, oh yeah, we're compatible. Like I can make it work, you know? And, I was telling, in a way, I was kind of telling myself who to be in that way, but that was also very influenced by like the patriarchy and wanting to get married. But me wanting to get married was also very much something of a way to escape my family because they were very controlling over me, especially my mom. But eventually he emailed me like basically rejecting me because he's like, I really want someone with like a passion, you know? And I felt really disappointed in myself because I'm like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I have a passion? Like what is my passion? And then I, met my husband, we just started dating and it went really fast and we became codependent, like real fast. And, with us, he had very strong interests. He loved jam bands, Fish, Grateful Dead. Yes, he was an Indian guy who loved that stuff and loved that scene. I've been to plenty of Fish shows. I know the different eras of Grateful Band, when they had true drummers, when they had one, yeah. I know like the Jerry, like how his voice got worse after all the heroin. Like I know all these different phases of Grateful Dead, guys, because of my ex-husband. I still do like some Grateful Dead songs. But he loved sports. So I went to all these like basketball, like I managed his fantasy football team. I went to all his nephew's baseball games. Like I became passionate about everything he became passionate about because early on in our relationship, he told me that I have no interests. So once again, this wound. And I also actually going to go back to astrology. My Chiron, which is like your wounded healer, and I think this is a big reason I do what I do, is in my 10th house in Taurus. And 10th house is like your public career image. So like my wound is literally in this like public space, like, and that is lots of times about career, how people perceive you in that way. And I mean, it's very true. That is how it has showed up in my life. And, now as a coach, this is kind of like what I love to support people doing is to discover who they are after being told who they have been. And even though like I was told I had no interest and I was really confused, I realized eventually that this was very much because of how I was raised and who I was told to be as a woman, whether I was too dark or not skinny enough or a lot of the stuff that cis women get conditioned, about. But I also was very driven in terms of like academics and about who I wanted to be when I grew up. But I felt like I kept having to fit into this mold of what I, as a daughter of South Asian Indian immigrants, should be, who I should be. Like, these are the values I should have, and I felt like I was very constantly being trapped. I felt very trapped growing up in my home, what I could do. Like, if I wanted to hang out with a friend, the answer was usually no. And I never felt like I could really express myself because I kept being pushed into a box, pushed into, this mold, and my escapes were crying in the bathroom and my physical room. I would, just be there. I would just get sad and just feel trapped I'm a Sagittarius moon, as I mentioned, I need to go out and explore. And I think that's where I do a lot of internal exploration because I think, and I'm just realizing this now, that's what I had access to, growing up. And, obviously you're young. I'm maybe I could have run away, but it probably wouldn't have lasted too long. I would not have had the resources to survive. And yeah, so I feel like I was constantly told to keep myself small, to keep my voice small, to be agreeable, to adjust, to do things that, and in lots of ways I felt like gender-wise, my parents, I have an older brother, they act, compared to a lot of my other South Asian friends, they were kind of equally as annoying to both of us, but I had more of a social life than my brother, so I always felt more constricted because I wanted to go out and do things. And I think those were opportunities, relational opportunities for me to connect with other people and discover who I am and to express, to literally express myself. And when I say that, right now, I feel like the pushing down of my body, opening up when I say express myself, because I felt like so much of it, like how I felt, what I thought about the world, why, even if I watch TV shows, I'm like, why are they doing that? Like stuff like that. Like I wanted to have conversations with people about these things. And I think this is another reason I really enjoyed on Sundays going to this Hindu kind of religious school called Swadhyay, because I really loved exploring the Bhagavad Gita and the different gods, because it was like this philosophical exploration that I could have, about life and what it means. And I really saw myself ever since I was like in 6th or 7th grade, really trying to understand why people did the things they did and like how people felt. And, I remember in 11th grade being like, oh, like I want to explore what happiness means. And I was so obsessed with it because I was probably like very unhappy and very trapped. So I was like very dedicated to that, And I think because even though I always had it in me ever since I was young to like kind of push myself out, I also was very, like I said, academic and very married to the meritocracy. And I really valued my worth based on like my grades. So then there was that part, the meritocracy that really pushed me down. So yeah, I just realized that like I ended up entering these relationships, these romantic relationships to escape my family so I could feel free, only to find myself being told that I have no interests instead of being encouraged to find what they are. And my ex-husband would encourage me in certain ways, but through his lens, he's like, learn an instrument, because he loved music, right? And he's like, we could play music together. And honestly, I have a lot of good memories with him playing piano and like learning saxophone. It was really nice. But I felt like, I started a blog at that time, but I feel like I really started expressing myself after I got divorced and I started writing about my story. I mean, the floodgates opened and I was like, writing helps me discover who I am and who beyond, and not just beyond, because I don't say beyond to like erase like my history, because that's very important, but it's almost like a rebirth from we're talking about composting and earthworms, right? Like all this stuff that was there that was not being composted. It was just stagnant. And there was no composting. I was not allowed to compost. Wow, I just realized that. Like, I was not allowed to take an idea and connect it to another idea and then share it with someone else and receive from them. Like, that is very life-giving for me. And writing was a way that I did that, because I integrated what I knew and I composted all the stuff that had happened in my life, and I shared it, because everything I did was like personal essays, basically. I was never into, I think, fiction, because like my nonfiction real life was so like so disparate. And I mean, I just feel like it's like I just visualize like a big knot, that just isn't tended to. It's dry and like wiry and stringy. And I needed to nurture it so it could look like roots, so it could connect to each other, so there could be growth. And yeah, I mean, that is my story. When I was talking to Opulence about like this episode, I kept thinking about career change, because I've had a lot of different careers. I was an IT consultant out of college, because that's what everyone was doing. Once again, like that's what Northwestern told me I should do. Investment banking, consulting, or go back to school to be a doctor or a lawyer. That felt like my options. So I did consulting because I was like, oh, okay, well, I like, helping people and like figuring out like, ideas and stuff like that, which I still love to do. But just like the corporate world was not for me. And then I was a recruiter because I loved helping people find jobs. Still too corporate for me. Then I dabbled in voiceover acting. But I realized like it didn't feel like a space that I could really support others. It was more solitary. I didn't feel like a growth with it. So I decided to become a speech therapist and then a librarian. And, all that, is a whole other story that I could share, that I thought I was going to share today, but I realized that so much of my grief, and I just realized I don't even talk about grief because we're talking about grief and love in my life. So much of my grief has been people telling me that I didn't know who I was, people telling me who I should be, and that stopped me from actually being the fullest expression of myself. Before we talked about this, you reflected back to me that it's about authenticity. It's interesting. I've had such a weird relationship with authenticity. It's felt so like diluted and like, and probably because of like Instagram, like wellness industry stuff, like be your authentic self. It just feels so empty. But I saw this thing, like ironically on Threads the other day that said, Authenticity is just allowing other people to see the relationship you have with yourself. And that just helped me rekindle a relationship with the word authenticity to be like, yeah, I do feel like in my life, I want people to see the relationship I have with myself. Where when I was younger, I didn't even know what that was because I didn't feel like I had the space to explore it. Woo, I'm gonna take a breath for myself right now. If you want to, you can do it with me, Opulence.
Yeah, let's take some breaths and just let all that sink in.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Oh, I'm still breathing. Hold on.
Oh yeah, sorry. Breathe, please breathe.
I need like probably 3 big ones just to let it all, soak in. Thank you so much, Nisha, for that rich and vulnerable share. I have so many reflections, actually. But yeah, the biggest one that I feel in my mind is just like who you are, that tension between who you are versus who you're told you can be. And that journey to actually say, no, I can be who I am. I don't need to follow I don't need to slot into these 3 options I have available, and through your story, wow, so much. I love that we start with you on a date, getting your MRS degree, dating, looking for the one. And I love that in that part of the journey, I love how, you're having this moment where this person is saying like, oh, you're not passionate. But then when you kind of walk us back to your childhood, I love the idea of inner exploration, exploring inner space, like finding spaciousness, finding areas to explore, even as you are being so boxed in and pigeonholed. And honestly, like control is a word coming up as I reflected back. And I mean, I really relate. I think a big part of why we have this podcast is because we are both people raised as South Asian women. And I don't know if there's a more controlled group out there. Like my dad used to look at me and say, everything you own belongs to me until the day you are married. And then it will belong to your husband. You will never own anything. And he said that to me from I have memories of being like really little, like maybe 2 or 3, and him telling me this. And it wasn't necessarily malicious, but it wasn't not malicious, right? Like it's an intense idea to drive into someone that you have no personhood and you have no ability to own something outside of the men you are in relationship to. So it makes very logical sense to me that you were like, okay, this is part of this is the evolution of my life. This is what growing up is. It is to find someone and get married. And I think that as you describe your childhood and adolescence to me, it's clear that you had so much passion for emotion, for healing, for feeling, for crying. But I can see you on that date and how awkward it is because being passionate about your own emotions, men for centuries have been labeling that as hysteria. And that does not fit into the cookie cutter, you like to cook, clean, sing, sew. It's you don't get to say, oh, I'm passionate about. Well, I guess you can in this day and age say I'm passionate about happiness or self-care, but I think what you're expressing, your true passion was so much more deeper and real than that. It's like a passion for this inner exploration and preserving your inner sanctity. And I can just see how it was beyond words, but also to be judged in that moment, for someone to look at you and be like, oh, you don't have a passion. That feels very cruel. You know, it feels like very dismissive and very difficult because it's also an experience of being deeply unseen. And I think wrapped in the tension of it is like what it is to have a passion that is beyond words and that like may also be taboo or make others uncomfortable in a way where it's not easily seen. It's actually actively hidden, you know? And I think it's another powerful point in the story is like when you're sharing about connecting with your husband and, you know, he's very embodied in his passion, which is not necessarily societally acceptable, but he has this access to it. And then he does encourage really great coping skills for you. Like music is powerful. Learning an instrument's powerful, but I think your story kind of points to this deeper truth that we all are who we are. And we all find for some of us, learning an instrument really like unlocks the soul. And it's this beautiful soul opening experience. Obviously, I think it can be that for all of us. Like you can see my keyboard in the back. I'm a music lover. But I'll be honest, learning music is a struggle for me. And it's something I do because it's a safe way to get out of my comfort zone. You know, the first time I took an adult music class, after the first lesson, I was like, music is problematic. I'm laughing. I was like, oh, I hate music. I was like, this is politically incorrect. And then I had to step back and be like, oh, why am I having this reaction to hate
hard
music?
For you?
Yeah, and to be like, this is oppressive. And it's like, it's literally not. And like, what a funny moment to see my own defense mechanisms and to also realize that like, I think growing up, I had to be perfect. Mm-hmm. If I wasn't perfect at something, I couldn't do it.
God, yeah.
So I realized like, oh, I got pretty good at like seeing how good I could do something the first time. And if I was below a certain threshold, we're ditching that, we're moving on. And I think that has to do with just like the conditions, the barbaric nature of my middle school, honestly. But all that to say, like, I love that you're like, yes, I had these great memories. I did learn these instruments. It was a good experience. But it did not set me free in the way that writing has set me free and opened up my soul and allow me to connect with my inner voice. And I think that speaks truly to authenticity. I'm still chewing on the definition of authenticity you shared about your relationship, authenticity being a relationship to self. I want to come back to that, but want to share that for me, I really started understanding authenticity when I was a young person in my undergraduate degree, and I was surrounded by people who were a little bit older than me, but at that time there was a very thriving scene around feminism. And truly, when I went to college, that is when I learned what a system of oppression was, and it changed my life. I had that moment that Paulo Freire talks about in Theory of Liberation of like awakening to consciousness, and is one of the most powerful moments of my life where I began to understand power and oppression. But in that moment, I remember having a conversation with a friend and realizing that so many of my actions were driven by the desire to fit in with people that I deemed as cool. And I would just chameleon or shape my whole personality around another person. And then I realized because the people I was trying to shape myself around valued authenticity and were talking about that, I had this very genuine light bulb where it's like, okay, I'm embracing this idea because they're saying it's good. But when I truly embrace the idea of authenticity, I'm realizing that in my body, I feel urges or impulses of things I want to do and listening to those and acting from a place of truth, acting from like a place of acknowledging the truth of my desire is how I understand authenticity. But, like, I think that like there are a lot of buzzwords, like, I think that values can be a buzzword that I feel like I'm working myself back towards. And authenticity is definitely one of those. In relationship to this conversation, I remember that, we both have Substacks. I've noticed you started posting on yours again. And I remember once you restacked one of my emails and you restacked it with a quote way in the bottom paragraph. And I was like, wow, Nisha really read this whole newsletter. And what you quoted was this part where I talk about how as a queer-bodied, trans, intersex person, I early in my life had to choose myself. And I had to, during this time period, I was like, you know what? I can't participate in the violence towards me. I can't participate in not just my own oppression, but the active suppression of my spirit and the like intense push I felt from everyone around me, but most aggressively, honestly, from my mom to be a cis-normative woman. And I felt ridiculous for being like, I can't wax my beard. Because around me, like all my female relatives, not to call them out, but while nobody had the same level of facial growth that I did, facial hair growth that I did, a lot of people in our community are extremely hairy and they just wax it right off. And it feels good for them. But every time I did it, it felt like I was removing a part of myself. And it became increasingly painful. And it came to a point where I was like, I actually just physically, like my spirit will not allow me to do this anymore. But in that email, what I was describing is how having to confront that at the age of 19, obviously scary and overwhelming, but I did it and I got through it and I created a life that many people were like, a trans consultant, that's not a thing. But I was like, I'm going to make it a thing. And then I did. And now it's a lot easier because I'm riding in the momentum of that choice to choose who I am authentically. And what I said in that newsletter is that sometimes I look around, and this is a little shady, but I look around to the cis-normative, so the cisgender people in my life, the people in my life who might be heterosexual, straight people, and I see that they may have never had to make a choice like that. They may have never had to walk away from family or communities. They may never have had to aggressively and boldly choose themselves. And it's actually a big deal because as I've reconnected with my family, I start to realize that in my cis hetero friendships, sometimes a lot of people are living a life for someone else's approval and have careers they hate. Like, actually, there's so many aspects of their life where they are not embodying their authentic self. And it always kind of shocks me because it helps me see the blessing that being queer is.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that because it's interesting. I was thinking about how hair removal for South Asian women is like a whole industry, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had since I was seventh grade. I remember the first thing I did was bleach my face. And I remember it burned so fucking much. I ran in our basement and I ran in circles just to get the air to cool it. I don't know why I didn't use a fan, but anyway, that's what I did. My mom was like, she always laughs at that. Then I did electrolysis. I've done laser. I've done threading. I've done waxing. I've done all of it, And it's interesting how for cis women, that is a gender affirming act. And for you, like you said, hurt your soul, and that for you, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but it sounds like that for you was gender affirming to not do it, for what you identified, how you identified with it.
No, exactly. I also bleached my facial hair, and I remember watching SpongeBob while bleaching my hair, and I would take a plastic fork and I would stab my face while the bleach was on it because it was
so itchy,
so uncomfortable.
So bad.
And then
don't bleach your face, you guys, please.
Yeah, it's tough. And then I also got electrolysis for 2 years, and then after that, because for some reason the electrolysis had no impact on my facial hair growth, and then I waxed for a little while until one day during the wax appointment, I just started sobbing. And the esthetician, that angel, she was like, I have to finish this, but like, we will never do this for you again. Like, you clearly hate this. And I never waxed my face again until very recently. When I went to India, I waxed in preparation just because I wanted to stay safe. And it was actually so bloody. Like, it was actually really, my beard has really taken root in my face in a way. But I think what you're pointing to is something that also comes up when I'm sometimes around other trans people, which is that a lot of people have full beards like mine that they do successfully remove. And that is the right decision for them. And whatever pain they go through, it's worth it, because when they look in the mirror, they see the person they truly are looking back at them. For me, going through those painful experiences was hurtful. And then when I saw myself in the mirror, it was an experience of sadness. And I think listening to that voice and realizing, even though my identity doesn't exist in the world as it is, anything is better than harming myself and then hating what I see looking back at me.
Yeah. Well, I think what we did right now was we just came back to the body, right? Like,
yeah.
And I think it comes full circle because it shows up for us in ways that are about people telling us who to be, but it also shows up differently based on how we like identify or like what choices we make to be ourselves, right? And actually, I want to reflect really quick on one thing you said about the piano, because the funny thing is I took piano lessons when I was younger, like 8 or 9, and I loved it. I was so good. I even made a song and I really enjoyed it. And then my mom made me quit because she said I wasn't practicing enough. And I'm like, I wrote my own song like that my teacher loved. She like loved me and I like loved her. And I remember like I have such a strong memory of my mom saying that to her. And I'm like, I'm still like, it makes me spoil so much because it's like, she's telling me that this is how I'm supposed to express my own art by doing it this way, because that's how my mom's a Capricorn, guys, an oldest daughter Capricorn. So of course I was supposed to do it the way she does, you know? And that when you said that, I'm like, oh yeah, that reminds me, because I actually love playing piano and I would love to take lessons again. But the way I did it with my ex-husband, and I did enjoy, like I said, I have a lot of good memories, but it was still like to play with him and to do stuff like not to be my own fullest expression about like, well, what do I just want to do, you know, and having the space to know what that is. So yeah, so much. And I loved how you also talk about the truth of your desire, because I like to define that as like what our will is. You know, what is your will and what are you doing? And how I realized that's for so much of my life, like pushing my will down was my norm. And now it's not. So in any moment, especially my mom or anybody really like challenges my will, I have to really, either I react or I have to be like, okay, I'm safe. I can still, you know, have my own truth and my desire and do that. But I know that like this makes me feel unsafe because of how I was received by others and how they wanted to control me. I mean, absolutely. It is a story of control for sure. So thank you so much, Opulence. I loved your reflection, and this was such a great full circle conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Nisha. And I actually want to take us out with a little joke, and it's a cheesy one, okay?
Yay.
I used to play piano by ear, but now I just play with my hands.
Oh, so good.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us this episode. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye. We decided that for our final episode this season, we would love to have a listener episode, and we want to hear from you.
Yeah, we're going to be doing an episode in line with our theme this season about grief, love, and pets. So some questions that can inspire you are, what are some ways you've grieved a pet that surprised you? Share stories of connecting with your pet after they died. And what have your pets taught you about love? So head to that fan mail text message button in our show notes and let us know.
And if you just want to send us a message letting us know what you thought about the podcast, we would love that too. Thank you.
Bye. Earthworm Slumber Party is hosted by Opulence and Nisha, edited and scored by Adrien Garbar, and produced by Dalya Guerin.